In the early morning hours of the 18th of March, 1990, two men dressed as Boston police officers approached the side entrance of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, a private art museum in Boston housing one of the most significant collections of European art in the United States, assembled by its founder in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and displayed, by the terms of her will, exactly as she had arranged it, with no piece to be moved, added, or removed. The two men told the night security guards on duty that they were responding to a disturbance report and needed to be let inside. The guards, in violation of the museum's own security protocols, opened the door. Once inside, the men handcuffed both guards, bound them in the museum's basement, and spent the next 81 minutes moving through the galleries. When they left, they had taken 13 works of art, including 3 paintings by Rembrandt, a Vermeer, works by Monet and Degas, and a Chinese bronze beaker. The estimated value of the stolen art at the time of the theft was placed at approximately $200 million. Adjusted for the appreciation of fine art markets in the decades since, contemporary estimates place the value at approximately $500 million, making it the largest property theft in the history of the United States and one of the largest art thefts in world history. More than 3 decades later, none of the stolen works have been recovered. No one has ever been charged with the crime. The empty frames that once held the stolen paintings still hang in the Gardner Museum's galleries, exactly where Isabella Stewart Gardner's will requires them to remain, as a deliberate and permanent reminder of what was taken. The investigation into the Gardner Heist has, over more than 3 decades, developed substantial circumstantial evidence pointing toward organized crime networks in the Boston area, though the precise chain of custody and the current location of the stolen art remain unresolved. The FBI's most developed theory, publicly disclosed in 2013 after years of investigation, holds that the theft was carried out by individuals connected to a regional organized crime network operating in the Boston and Connecticut area, and that the stolen works moved through this network in the years immediately following the theft, with possible attempts to sell or fence the paintings in Connecticut and Philadelphia in the mid-1990s. The 2 specific individuals whom the FBI has identified as its primary suspects, both since deceased, were figures with documented connections to organized crime in the Boston area at the time of the theft. The FBI's public statements in 2013 indicated confidence that they had identified the individuals responsible for the theft and the initial movement of the stolen art, while acknowledging that the current location of the paintings themselves remained unknown. This gap between identifying who likely committed the theft and recovering the actual stolen property illuminates one of the most distinctive and counterintuitive features of the high-value stolen art market. Stolen masterpieces of this caliber are, in practical terms, almost impossible to sell on any open or even semi-open market, because their fame and distinctiveness make them instantly recognizable to any legitimate dealer, auction house, insurer, or law enforcement agency anywhere in the world. A stolen Rembrandt cannot simply be sold to a private collector through ordinary channels, because any collector with the resources and sophistication to purchase a genuine Rembrandt would also have the knowledge to recognize that this particular Rembrandt had been reported stolen from a major museum and would face significant legal jeopardy in purchasing or even possessing it. This fundamental unsellability of famous stolen art has generated an alternative economic function for these objects within criminal networks, a function that art crime. Investigators and academics who study the field have documented extensively, and that explains why so much famous stolen art, including the Gardner paintings, is never recovered and apparently never sold in any conventional sense. Rather than attempting to sell stolen masterpieces for cash, a transaction that exposes both buyer and seller to substantial legal risk, and that requires finding a buyer willing to take on a piece of property that can never be publicly displayed, insured, authenticated through normal channels, or resold without enormous risk. Organized crime networks frequently use stolen high-value art as a form of collateral or a unit of value transfer within transactions that themselves operate entirely outside legitimate financial systems. The specific mechanism that has been documented in multiple cases involves stolen art being used to secure or facilitate transactions in the illegal drug trade, the illegal arms trade, or other forms of organized criminal commerce, where the parties involved cannot use conventional financial instruments, bank transfers, checks, even most forms of cash transaction at the scale required, without generating a paper trail that would expose the underlying illegal transaction to law enforcement. Scrutiny. A stolen masterpiece functions, in this context, similarly to how gold or diamonds might function in other criminal contexts, as a store of value that is portable, that retains its worth independent of any single jurisdiction's currency, and that does not require the kind of institutional verification and registration that conventional financial assets require. A criminal organization might transfer a stolen Vermeer to a counterparty as partial payment for a shipment of narcotics or weapons, with both parties understanding that the painting's value is roughly equivalent to a certain dollar amount, without either party ever needing to actually attempt to sell the painting on any market. The painting simply moves from one criminal network's possession to another's, its value implicitly agreed upon, never surfacing publicly, never appraised by any legitimate authority, functioning as a kind of underground bearer instrument. This explains a pattern that has been observed repeatedly in significant art theft cases worldwide. Recovered stolen art is frequently found in the possession of criminal organizations with no apparent connection to art dealing or any legitimate interest in art as a cultural or aesthetic object, often years or decades after the original theft, having apparently changed hands multiple times among criminal networks for reasons entirely unrelated to the art's aesthetic or cultural significance. The international scope of stolen art's use as criminal collateral has been documented in multiple significant cases beyond the Gardner Heist. Investigators in several European countries have identified instances where stolen masterworks were recovered in connection with investigations into drug trafficking and organized crime entirely unrelated, on their face, to art theft. The paintings found essentially as a byproduct of investigations focused on narcotics or weapons trafficking, having been used as collateral or partial payment within those criminal transactions. This pattern has led art crime investigators to characterize the market for famous stolen masterpieces as fundamentally different from markets for less famous, more easily disguised stolen art. Lower profile stolen art, pieces by less famous artists, or works that have not received the kind of intense public attention that accompanies a major museum theft, can sometimes be successfully reintroduced into legitimate or semi-legitimate markets through forged provenance, sale to unwitting or willfully negligent buyers, or movement through jurisdictions with less rigorous art market regulation. The most famous stolen works, pieces whose theft generated international media coverage and whose images are consequently known to virtually every legitimate participant in the global art market, cannot follow this path. Their fame, which made them valuable enough to steal in the first place, is precisely what makes them impossible to monetize through conventional means after the theft. The Gardner Museum has maintained a $5 million reward for information leading to the recovery of the stolen works in good condition, among the largest rewards ever offered for the return of stolen property, a figure that reflects both the value of the art and the museum's persistent hope that someone within whatever criminal network currently holds or has knowledge of the painting's location might eventually be motivated to come forward. The empty frames in the Gardner Museum's Dutch Room Gallery, where Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee and his self-portrait once hung, remain on the walls exactly as Isabella Stewart Gardner's will specify the collection must be displayed, unchanged, in perpetuity, with no substitutions and no rearrangement. The frames stand as a deliberate visual statement, an acknowledgement of absence, maintained precisely because the will's terms do not permit the museum to simply remove the evidence of what was taken and rearrange the remaining collection to disguise the gap. Visitors to the museum see, alongside the genuine masterpieces that remain, the literal shape of what was stolen, a Rembrandt-sized space where a Rembrandt should be. Somewhere, in the possession of someone, the actual paintings exist. Whether they hang in a private collection maintained by someone wealthy enough and discreet enough to display them without ever revealing their existence, or whether they have been damaged or destroyed by careless handling or storage over 3 decades of clandestine movement through criminal networks, or whether they continue to circulate as collateral in transactions entirely disconnected from anyone who could appreciate what they actually are, no one outside the network that has held them since 1990 can say.